Now welcome to another Let's Talk Some Star Wars, where this time we'll be taking a look at and discussing the results of the poll that asked, how do you feel about Ewoks in Return of the Jedi? But before we get to all that, we have to discuss what brought this question on in the first place, that being some recent comments about Return of the Jedi and the Ewoks within it, that were made by Denis Villeneuve, who is, of course, most famously these days known for the two Dune movies. He directed them, and he sometimes gets asked if he has any interest in doing a Star Wars movie, and recently he was asked that again, and had this to say about Star Wars. The Empire Strikes Back is the movie that I anticipated the most in my life. I saw the movie 1 billion times on screen. I was traumatized by The Empire Strikes Back. I adore Star Wars. The problem is that it all derailed in 1983 with Return of the Jedi. It's a long story. I was 15 years old, and my best friend and I wanted to take a cab and go to LA and talk to George Lucas. We were so angry. Still today, the Ewoks. It turned out to be a comedy for kids. And he is, of course, free to have any opinion he wants about my personal favorite movie of all time, that being Return of the Jedi, of course, which I saw in the theater when I was 5 years old, and no surprise, I didn't have too much problem with the Ewoks. In fact, I had none. I don't necessarily remember loving the Ewoks and being obsessed with them, but certainly I had zero issue with them. I had a few Ewok action figures. I may have had a stuffed animal. I don't remember. I also enjoyed the subsequent Ewok movies. I enjoyed the cartoon. So yeah, I was an Ewok fan. Again, I didn't love them, but they were part of Star Wars, so any part of Star Wars back then was fine with me. That said, with him being 15 at the time, I could see how he was maybe in the anti-target audience, if you will, that you are a teenager and you've grown up with Star Wars essentially. You saw it maybe get a little more mature in The Empire Strikes Back 3 years earlier, which apparently that is his favorite movie, or favorite Star Wars movie at least, because he talks about seeing it 1 billion times on screen. So I could understand maybe feeling like you're growing up yourself, you're maturing, that you really might not appreciate quote-unquote teddy bears in the Star Wars movie, quote-unquote defeating the Empire. And we'll talk more about that defeating the Empire part when we get to some comments. But yeah, I could understand him personally not liking the Ewoks at that time in his life. As for it derailing Star Wars, that I don't really understand people who hate Ewoks so much that they just look at everything else in Return of the Jedi and think it was a bad movie that ruined Star Wars. I mean, the space battle of Endor is still, in my opinion, one of the best looking space battles of all time. Now, you could argue a second Death Star wasn't the most original concept, but overall, I still think it works. It's very dramatic. And then, of course, you have everything with Luke, Vader, and Palpatine, which is just some of the best Star Wars ever. You have the conclusion of Anakin's story. You have Luke tossing his saber away and standing up to the dark side, saying he'll never return. You have all these things, and then you have the father and son saying goodbye to each other. You have perhaps the most perfect ending you could ever conceive for a movie. And yeah, you also have some space teddy bears again, but I don't know how you look at everything else that movie accomplishes and just say, well, it's got teddy bears, I can't stand it. It ruined Star Wars. And he goes on to say a few other things about Star Wars, which I don't really want to get into here. I want to mainly focus about Ewoks. I want to talk about some Ewoks in this video. But anyway, I'm not really bothered by this. He can have any opinion he wants about the Ewoks and Return of the Jedi and Star Wars in general. I still enjoyed both Dune movies. I know there are people who don't like the second one in particular, that it kind of strays from the books and all that, but whatever. We're going to move on to the poll results now, where again the question was, how do you feel about Ewoks in Return of the Jedi? And 21% said they love Ewoks. There was then another 53 who said they're fine, or I'm okay with them, or I don't mind them. 22% then said, I don't really like them, but they're not that bad. And then there was 4% who said, I can't stand them, they ruin the movie for me. And so it seems like overall there isn't a ton of hatred for the Ewoks. It seems like the majority here either liked them or don't really have any sort of problem with them. Either way. While about a quarter of people either just didn't like them and they weren't really that bothered by them, or that 4% just didn't like them at all, which again is fine. I get it. I can certainly look at them now, all these years later, and see why some people may have really not liked them back then. But I do think there are some perhaps misunderstandings about the Ewoks or the Battle of Endor in general, which we're now going to discuss by moving on to some comments here. But not before once again just saying thank you to everyone who votes, comments, or watches these or any of my videos. It is all greatly appreciated. Also a big thank you to those who support me over on Patreon and help make this all happen. But now let's move on to those comments, and we'll start with the top rated one, as we always do, and it came to us from Paul McSoul, who said, "Be honest, we all cried when that one Ewok died and his friend couldn't wake him up." And yeah, I was always sad as a kid watching Return of the Jedi many times. I was always sad when our one Ewok friend died. And I think this is where maybe the first misconception about the Ewoks comes in. There are always people who say they just defeated the Empire, like they didn't take any casualties, when I'm sure the Ewoks took heavy casualties in this fight. There were AT-STs running around gunning them down until a couple got smashed, or one got kind of lost its balance with the logs. And then, of course, Chewbacca commandeered one and blasted some stormtroopers and another AT-ST. Anyway, I am sure the Ewoks took heavy casualties in this fight. This is not the only one to die, or one of the few. I appreciate the fact that Lucas put this scene in there to kind of show us that, yeah, this is going to be a hell of a fight for the Ewoks. They are not getting out of this unscathed. But at the same time, you don't want to show Ewoks because, yes, they are kind of in there for the kids to a degree, no doubt. You don't want to show them getting just blown to pieces. You don't want tufts of bloodied fur flying all over the screen. But you did want to hammer home the fact that, yes, there will be a cost to helping the rebellion, to fighting for their home as well. So I really enjoy that scene. Yes, it is a very sad scene. It is supposed to be sad because the Ewoks do have to pay a price just like the rest of the galaxy for the tyranny of the Empire. Alright, and next up we have this one from Ember Fist, who said, "Ewoks work. People forget they were about to eat our heroes, and they were reasonable in terms of their capabilities. They had no problem with taking out the stormtroopers, but had more difficulty against the AT-STs. This is actually quite smart for the Vietnam War allegory, as the Viet Cong's reputation came from infantry combat, and they had few counters to allied armored vehicles. They needed Chewbacca to hijack the AT-ST to win in the end. They are also a very few fleshed out species in the galaxy on a level only really seen with Hutts, Wookiees, and Gungans. In general, I enjoy them, and Wicket W. Warwick is one of my favorite characters in the franchise." That then goes along with this one from Butcher Pete, who said, "I voted in the don't really like them but they aren't that bad category because they really aren't that bad. But I personally feel like there was a much better way to convey the message Lucas wanted to, that being the rural farmers versus mechanized military idea. He was using the Viet Cong of Vietnam against the US military and wanted to riff off that because it's not like the Viet Cong were simpletons with bows and arrows. They had firearms, advanced explosives, and contrary to Hollywood's beliefs, were trained, most of them anyway, in basic ambush and guerrilla warfare tactics by the Russians. I feel like a slightly more technologically advanced alien species that had been skirmishing with the Imperials on Endor would have made a lot more sense and been more plausible for moviegoers." And I agree, I think the Ewoks could have been a little more capable. They didn't have to be the little teddy bears that they are, as so many people like to call them. Though yes, that was certainly intended to appeal to children, to sell toys to children. No matter what defense I make for the Ewoks here, or anyone makes for the Ewoks, there's no denying that they were meant to be marketed to kids. I'm sure I wasn't the only kid who watched the movies and the cartoon, and again, probably had an Ewok stuffed animal or whatever it might be. Certainly, Lucas made a ton of money off that. But nevertheless, there is a message here about the more simple defending their homeland against the technologically advanced superior opponent, who really isn't fighting for their homeland. They're fighting for whatever reason they might be fighting for. I do think this makes an interesting point. I think it makes many interesting points, and that's what, again, people tend to overlook about this. It's not that the Ewoks beat the Empire. I always see that the Ewoks somehow defeated the Empire. The Ewoks did not defeat the Empire. Even Lucas has said they were nothing more than a distraction during the battle, while the rebellion focused on the shield generator and kind of tricked them in the end. Got the doors open, went in, blew it up, and the rebels end up winning. But it's not like the Ewoks were winning that fight. Basically, what the Ewoks did, if we really look at it in context, and it's about, what, 15, 20, half-hour long fight? It's not like it goes on for hours and hours. but they basically lasted 30 minutes against a superior opponent on their home turf in their home forest. They had all the advantages in that department, and what happens? They're still getting blown to pieces. Again, we're not seeing it, but it's still happening. Yes, they're killing some stormtroopers along the way with their bows and arrows and other tactics, but if that battle goes on any longer, if the Ewoks truly had to stand toe-to-toe against the Empire, against Palpatine's best troops, a legion of his best troops, they lose. Alright, and the next one comes to us from Seth Young, who said, there's actually a really good video somewhere out there of Sam Witwer explaining the Ewoks. He mentions how they expand on Luke's lesson from Episode 5. Because of Yoda, he learned not to belittle those who appeared small and weak. Luke giving the Ewoks a chance is what gave the rebels victory at Endor. And that is an excellent point. It is indeed Luke who sort of de-escalates the situation where Han just wants to blast his way out of the Ewoks. Luke is the one who takes advantage of the fact that they think that C-3PO is a god and says we should go along with this, and ultimately helps to recruit them to fight the Empire, which is what causes the distraction they use to, again, win the Battle of Endor and to ultimately defeat the Empire. It is not the Ewoks who win it. They are simply a part of a bigger plan that really came down to Luke giving them a chance because of, what he had learned earlier on from Yoda about not just thinking this thing is useless on the side of the road. That was the whole idea with Yoda in The Empire Strikes Back. He was the little creature you come across on the side of the road, think nothing of, and then come to learn is actually the great and powerful wizard of sorts. Alright, and let's do one more here really quick. That comes to us from the repository, who said, them saving the day at the shield generator was a little contrived for my taste, but Luke confronting Vader and the Emperor and the battle of the second Death Star more than makes up for it. And I think that is a fair assessment. I said earlier, if you really want to get upset about the Ewoks and think they ruined the whole movie, so be it. Let it ruin the Return of the Jedi for you. But in all reality, there are a lot of other really, really good things about the ending of that movie. Yeah, we can have a discussion about the whole Jabba's palace scene, which I personally love. I talked about this in a video not too long ago where I sort of re-reviewed Return of the Jedi. I get that it takes up a good chunk of the movie and doesn't really accomplish anything for the overall story except for saving Han. But the back half of that movie, yes, there are Ewoks, there are space teddy bears, but there is so much about that movie to love, and to say that it ruins Star Wars and that it is a terrible movie because of it, that is just something I do not agree with. Well, that is going to be all I got for you this time. Now it is your turn. Take to the comments below. Let's continue the discussion or debate about Ewoks. Are they good? Are they bad? Are they kind of neutral? Or do they ruin Star Wars? Whatever the case may be, leave a comment below. Let's talk some Star Wars. And until next time, thanks for watching.